And I still remember looking up, all this water, but there was a bright light. It might have been the sun. I don't remember how, but anyway, I did see a bright light. And instantly, Radek, I was up alongside the canoe, and when I popped up above the water, the canoe was like this far from my face.
Hello and welcome, this is Karczmarczyk, and this is all new episode of Incredible Stories, an American version of a Polish popular podcast called Path of Life. And today we're gonna talk with my special guest. I have lived here in this house for exactly 10 years. When I first moved in, I met a gentleman who lives 2 doors down, who happened to be a pastor and inspired me since the very beginning. Today, my guest, Pastor Steven, is with me. Welcome to the studio.
I'm pleased to be here.
Okay, this is first time we're doing this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Pastor Steve have been with Evangelical Church since 1991. It's almost as long as I live.
I suppose, yeah. You're making me feel old now, Radek.
No, but your spirit is still young.
Thank you. I hope so.
Yeah. Pastor, our show is about you. We often say that everybody has a book inside in your heart that could write down, but we don't do it very often. And that's why we created Path of Life, Incredible Stories podcast for other people to get inspired, to get motivated, to get these captivating stories, and be really inspired and moved sometimes emotionally, sometimes physically. But anyways, it's all about us, people. It's all about our spirit who lives inside our bodies. Because we often say that we are not our problems, we are not our bodies, and we are something else, we are something more. Exactly,
Good.
Right?
I like that.
So, let's talk a little bit about your story and how it all started. What inspired you to become a pastor?
Well, it probably began when I was a little boy, in elementary school age. I grew up in a good Evangelical Covenant church in Viking, Minnesota, an hour south of Canada, and town of 145 people.
Interesting.
But a good church, and my parents took me there frequently, and well, every week. And when we had missionaries come to visit our church, we would often have them over to our house for a meal because my mom was a wonderful cook. And so we'd feed them and I'd get to meet the missionary kids. And I loved talking with them, playing with them, hearing their stories. And so I think even at that early age, God put it in my heart that I should be a missionary somewhere. And so even from that age, I was thinking about that. I went to college. I was going to be a high school music teacher. My parents are musicians, and we traveled and sang in churches. And I got a bachelor's degree in music. But while I was in school for music, Bemidji State University in Minnesota, my roommate was the staff member for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. You probably heard of them, and they do a lot of work around the world. And I was the missions coordinator for the campus. And as part of that, I led a small group and was responsible for the missions emphasis of our chapter. Then I went to the Urbana Missions Conference in 1979. And Billy Graham, at the close of the conference, there were about 18,000 students there in the stadium at Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. And he said, I'm calling you, if you feel God is calling you to serve him anywhere, anytime, doing anything, if you're willing to make that kind of unconditional commitment, I want you to stand right now. And God had already been working in my heart, and I stood. But almost every other young person in the auditorium stood. And Billy Graham had a shocked look on his face. He said, no, sit down, all of you. And they had him speak at Urbana many times because of his stature. And he said, I've never seen this happen before.
Wow.
You need to understand the seriousness of this commitment. Serve God anytime, anywhere, doing anything. And he said, so now that I want you to think about what you're standing up for, I invite you now to stand again. If you're serious, and I think even more of the people stood up at that time. And very few were sitting down, and he was just amazed at the moving of God. Well, I was part of that.
Was the crowd mostly young people? Or?
It's mostly young people
Okay.
because it's for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is college
Okay,
students. It's a
yes.
college ministry. Almost all young people. It was a fantastic week down there at Urbana. Changed my life. And other big speakers there, Elizabeth Elliot. You probably heard of Jim Elliot, who is missionary, murdered by the Auca Indians in Ecuador, along with his partners. Anyway, so it was a challenging thing. So I went back to school, had another year of college left. And at that point, I believe God laid it on my heart that I should do a short-term mission right after college graduation. So I started applying, and I went with the Evangelical Alliance Mission team, which is based right out here in Wheaton. They sent me to Indonesia right after college graduation for the whole summer, and I taught English and directed choir and taught music there, did whatever else they needed in Indonesia for that summer, and that was also a life-changing experience. So those are some of the formative experiences for me that I felt God was really calling me into full-time ministry.
Was it interesting that at that time you did a lot of traveling, right?
Yeah.
Did change of the environment also influenced you at some point?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yes, and it did, because a year earlier, 2 years earlier, 1979, as a music student, our choir from school was invited by the Israeli and the Swiss government to come and participate in their international music festival for choirs. So in 1979, our choir went over to Israel and Switzerland for the whole summer. And we spent about 5 weeks in Israel and another 2 weeks or a little bit longer in Switzerland. And I just loved that trip. That was my first time for international travel outside of Canada. And that also said, man, for selfish reasons, I think I'd like to be a missionary. And because I like travel, like other cultures, and so that did play an important role. Yeah.
Important coincidence you mentioned at the very beginning that you lived in a Viking town near Canada.
Yeah.
And we spoke the other day that your ancestors are actually from Norway.
Norway and Sweden.
And
I'm half
Sweden.
Swedish, half Norwegian.
So actually Viking.
We're actually Vikings. Yes.
So it's really a coincidence that nowadays you started your life at the very beginning at the Viking town.
Yes.
Wow. And that led you to a Christian path. Very interesting, very intriguing. Pastor Steve, I have lived here exactly 10 years. We've talked a lot over those years, but we never had that chance to really sit and talk about your path of life. Who do you think, or in other words, how do you think God works through us?
How does God work for us? Well, that's an excellent question too, Radek. And he works through other people and circumstances to guide us and shape us and move us. Like I was saying, it was no accident. My parents had these missionary families over to their home, and I got to play with their kids and talk with them. That really put the fire for missions in me. So that was no coincidence. That was no accident. That was all in the plan of God.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So there is no coincidences in life, you're
None
saying.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
No. And when we make bad decisions, God is even capable of working through those. Yeah. And one sermon illustration I've used that resonates with people is that I think the will of God is a lot like the GPS unit I have for my car. It has the ideal route programmed into the computer for where I should go. But if I zone out, take a wrong turn, well, the GPS says recalculating. And then it gets me back on the right path. I've seen God do that with me because I've made some bad choices, stupid choices.
Like everyone does.
Yes, everybody does. But God recalculates. And if we're willing to be redirected. He'll redirect us and get us where we should go. For instance, I never planned on being a pastor in the United States for my career. I was planning to go overseas on the mission field. When I came home from Indonesia and started working in a job, thinking of going to seminary, which I didn't end up doing, but I met my wife when I was in Minneapolis working as a youth pastor and music director at a little church there in Richfield, Minnesota. And we were both planning to be missionaries. And so after a year in Minneapolis, we were married and then came down here to go to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School Seminary, both of us fully planning on we'd go out somewhere as missionaries. But in the 5 years we were in seminary, my wife was in 5, it's now 7 or 8 car accidents where people hit her from behind and messed up her back. And when we were ready to graduate from seminary, we met with the doctor for the Free Church Mission, and they said, we're not going to send you anywhere because of your wife's medical problems. And so you need to stay here in the United States for the medical care. So then our plans to go overseas kind of went out the window, but this church that we were attending called us to be the pastor in 1991, and that's where we've been ever since. And so even now, though...
that's how we happened to be here in this place?
That's how we ended up being here. We never intended to be here.
Wow.
But God had other plans, and one of the joys of my life is, because of the internet, just what you're doing, people around the world are listening to my messages on SoundCloud and Facebook and our website, and it's exciting to see the countries, people, especially countries that are close to Christian missionaries. Of course, they can still, most cases, get on the internet, and it's amazing the reach you can have even from a little place here in the United States around the world.
Yeah, and we are near Chicago Land area, and you could think that there is a lot of people here, but you can influence also a lot of people over there somewhere.
Yes.
That you would never have had a chance to do it.
I would never think I've got people listening to my teaching in Egypt or Iran,
for example,
or places like that. It just blows me away.
And you do have really charisma. If you guys would like to see one of those speeches, go ahead. That's on SoundCloud.
Yeah, SoundCloud, and just search my name, Steven Hjelle, Hjelle. And if you just put that in Google even, just put my name into Google, the first thing that comes up is Steven Hjelle's podcast. And it takes you right to SoundCloud. I just had to do it for some relatives in California that wanted to listen. I said, just try it. Put it in Google, and it comes right up, which I'm grateful for.
Well, we mentioned your wife, and she is all in supporting you in what you're doing.
Yeah. Before we were married, she went to the Wycliffe School down in Texas for Bible translators, and that's what she was wanting to do. So, yeah, I kind of had a rule, Radek, because like any young man, I made some dating mistakes.
Okay.
I mean, good women, but they were not planning to be missionaries. And once God really put the call to be a missionary on my life, I thought, not every woman wants to go to a foreign country as a missionary because it can be difficult. I saw it firsthand. Life of a missionary is not easy. And so I would only date women that were already thinking of being a missionary, because said, why should I date and get involved with a woman and she realizes what I want to do with my life and she says, no way. You know, that's...
Exactly.
And so I would only date women who were interested in missions, and my wife was one. And well, here we are, married 37 years later.
So what's the secret of successful marriage?
2 words. Yes, dear.
Yes, dear. Thank you for that.
Well, I'm kind of
I think women will like that.
Yeah, they will like that. I'm kind of kidding, but it really, it's you're not there to get for you. You're there to serve someone else. And I would say to people who want to be married, Christian people who want to honor God with their life, you should not get married unless you think you can serve God better with this person as your spouse than you could serve him alone. That is the number one reason I tell people they should get married. And other people come up with all kinds of other reasons, but it should be about you can serve God better together than you could separately.
So if you can answer this question, can I serve God better with this person? Is this my other half that completes me?
Exactly.
Right?
Complements you. Because my wife and I are very different. And after 37 years, we're still discovering more differences. But that's what makes us strong.
Yeah, and she's there with you at every service.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
She plays instruments, right?
Yeah, she plays the French horn, the mandolin in our worship band, and I play the piano and sing and lead the music.
And you really, as I mentioned before, you do have charisma. We mentioned Billy Graham, and he was like the godfather of pastoring, I believe so. And there is an interesting story. I recommend everybody to read the book Unbroken. We've talked about this one.
Yes, and I have the book too. Yeah.
The story about Louis, who had a very interesting life. He was in Second World War as a bombardier. I'm not going to get into entire story, but after he came back miraculously from Japanese camp, he was saved by number one, his wife, and number two, Billy Graham.
Yeah.
And there was this voice inside of him, because everybody, pretty much 99.9% of soldiers, after serving in military, they come back to homes, to their families with PTSD.
Yes.
And they have huge problems. He had alcoholic problem.
Yeah.
And once he went to one of those services with Billy Graham, it was not the first time, but I believe the second time he went, it completely changed his life.
And the movie by the same name is incredible
Unbroken, too. I recommend everybody. It is a number one. If you do not have Unbroken book in your home library, it is not complete.
Yes, I would agree, definitely.
Speaking about books, every year around Christmas, I get a present, and there is a little book from Pastor Steve. Why is reading important?
Oh, reading is very important and becoming, I think, less and less popular now.
Yes.
But it is so important because...
Unfortunately, but it is. But, we forgot how it is, the magic of holding this book.
Yes.
And reading.
Yes.
I can read on Kindle or on my cell phone, or I can listen to audiobook. That's different, You don't see this. There is no personal touch in electronics, right?
Reading a book is interactive, not just passive. I love audiobooks. I listen to them all the time in the car.
I listen to them too when I'm driving.
But there's something about reading a book, and if I'm reading an important book, I index it as I'm going along. Like if I'm reading a quote that I might want to come back to later, I'll take note of the page number, and I go to the back of the book, and I hope the printer has left 2 or 3 blank pages of paper in the back, and then I'll put page 19, and I'll put 3 words about that quote, so then I can come back to that book years later, and if I'm looking for that quote and I knew it's in that book, I can just scan my index, and in a minute, I can find the quote, and it's been very helpful. I recommend that to your listeners.
Yeah, okay, great tip. Let's talk a little bit about faith. Our organization called All Equal Foundation made 3 movies so far, 2 of which are called Power of Faith. What does faith mean to you?
Oh, excellent question. And by the way, I love the movies you guys do. Just really have enjoyed them immensely. Faith, to me, and what the Bible says, it's the substance of things not seen.
The evidence of things hoped for.
Exactly.
Hebrews 11:1.
Yes, very good, Radek. I'm impressed. Yeah. Very good. And we all have faith in something. And so this morning, you know what I had for breakfast? I had 3 of the eggs, and they're eggs that you gave me from Wisconsin. I still have a few left.
Great.
Oh, they're good eggs. Huge eggs, really good. Okay, but I don't know the farmer who raised them. I mean, I know you. I would trust you with my life because we've become such good friends, but I don't know the people who made the eggs, but I trusted my life to that little round oblong sphere and the chicken who made it. And we exercise faith all the time, but some people tell me, I can't believe in a God I can't see. I said, but you realize you put your life on the line when you go to Starbucks, McDonald's, you eat food from anywhere, an egg, and you don't know who made it. You trust your life to that it's not laced with poison. And so I encourage people to look at God's word, and especially the fulfilled prophecies. There are over 300 Old Testament prophecies about Jesus that are fulfilled in the New. And the odds of even 8 of those prophecies being fulfilled in the life of one person, the odds of that happening by coincidence is 10 to the 17th power. 10 followed by 17 zeros. That's just for 8 of the prophecies.
Okay.
If you consider 300 or even 100 prophecies, it's astronomical. They couldn't have happened by coincidence, by accident. So I direct people to consider that as they're thinking about faith, about believing the Bible and that Jesus is who he claimed to be. Consider fulfilled prophecy. To me, it's an unassailable argument for the truth of the Bible. And so, of course, I've dedicated my life to helping people find faith in Jesus Christ and then finding eternal life, because Jesus said, John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. A lot of people, I have good friends that say, but, I believe all prayers lead to the same place. But that's not what Jesus said. He said, I am the only way. He's the only Son of God who died for our sins and rose again. And that's what I've made my life mission, to communicate that and to try to challenge people to put their faith in Jesus Christ. I've staked my eternal destiny on him, and I'm very much at peace with that. And that has been you talk about path of life. That is my path of life.
Exactly.
And you and all the neighbors on this block, we try to every year give at least one book to help them think and read and hopefully find Jesus Christ.
Talking about Jesus, he also said, follow me. So, in other words, be like me, do what I do, teach as I teach, behave as I behave, because since I'm the way, follow my way, right? Follow my path. And therefore, we have this example, that blueprint. I personally believe that Bible is a blueprint to not only live happily ever after you die, but live happily after right now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And
Jesus never said that, when you die. No, it is a blueprint, do this, and right now.
How to live right. Absolutely. It's the owner's manual for life.
Exactly.
When you get these computers, all this fancy stuff we use, if you really want to know how to use it and get the enjoyment out of it, you need to read the owner's manual. I know a lot of people get the manual, throw it in a corner, but with technical stuff, it doesn't work that way. You need the manufacturer's instructions in the Bible. God created us. He knows best how to live. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. How does the church treat the Old Testament versus the New Testament?
Well, a disturbing trend that I'm seeing out there and hearing about is kind of a discounting of the Old Testament. And I won't drop names, but some of the biggest names in the evangelical world, church world, have now said that we don't need the Old Testament anymore. We've got the New Testament. It just drives me up the wall, because the Old Testament is 2/3 of the Bible.
Yes.
And you can't understand the New Testament without the Old. It's the foundation. Right now in our church, I'm going through a sermon series on Esther. Incredible book from the Old Testament. And without the story of Esther, we wouldn't have Jesus, because Haman in the Persian Empire, he wanted to exterminate the Jewish people. And your movies highlight that, how evil people want to exterminate the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Well, without the Jews, we wouldn't have Jesus.
Yes.
And so this book of Esther is profoundly important. It's incredibly exciting. Little commercial. All my sermons are available on SoundCloud so far, and they will be, and our videos are on YouTube Live for that as well. But the Old Testament is incredibly relevant, and it saddens me when I hear people today discount it. It's absolutely relevant. It's more difficult, maybe, to interpret, because it is from an ancient time.
Yes.
But people haven't changed. We have the same needs, desires, wants. God hasn't changed. And so the Old Testament is every bit as relevant for us today as it was 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago.
I believe so, because there is so much wisdom in the Old Testament.
Yep.
Stories of Moses, stories of, oh my goodness.
Abraham,
Joshua.
Yes,
just so much wisdom. And without
Yes.
it, as you said, it's a foundation. We can't build the house and never mind the church unless foundation, strong foundation.
Yeah.
So thank you for clarifying that. There is one more thing that I'd like to mention before we go on to the next one. Recently, scientists have discovered that there is a code in the Bible. Maybe you've heard about that. The Bible code.
Oh, yes.
And right now there is a computer programming advanced enough to put it through the program and decode the code of the Bible. And it appears so that every event, every name possible that could happen, future, past, or present, is encoded in the Bible. Using the right codes, of course, you can decode it. So your name, my name is in the Bible. Our lives are in the Bible. Our possible lives are in the Bible. But what's even more interesting is that by every possible situation that could happen, there is a sentence that's also decoded. Will you allow for this to happen? So, for example, every event like 9/11, it was encoded in the Bible. Every president so far in the United States was encoded in the Bible. And every event around that was encoded. So if it was already written years ago, we don't have to worry about nothing, right?
Oh, I completely agree. Psalm 139 said every day of your life was written in a book before any of them came to be. Mm-hmm. God has perfect knowledge of the future. Now, I don't know about this whole computer program thing. Maybe it would be fascinating. I would just not want people to think, and I know you're not saying this, but that you can't understand the Bible unless you have a Cray supercomputer. Exactly. It was written for the common person to understand. But if this is true, fine. It wouldn't surprise me.
The computer programming works only when the Bible is written in Hebrew, in original text.
So only for the Old Testament then?
Yes. I believe they say the Bible, so the whole thing.
So then they would also work with Greek then for the New Testament?
That must have worked, yes, but not. It can't be translated into any other languages. It's originally written, yeah.
Okay.
But this is still a thing to discover. Right now we know that it is fascinating what they came up with technology nowadays.
Oh yeah, it blows my mind.
Yeah. But another story is in the New Testament, we often say in our lives that we're overwhelmed, mm-hmm. right? And since we're talking about it right now, since everything has been written already, there is nothing to worry about. Mm-hmm. So why we are overwhelmed? Why do we still feel stressed? Why do we still have anxiety attacks? Why do we still sweat and suffer? Mm-hmm. Can you have any ideas why
yes.
people?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I do have great compassion and sympathy for people who have anxiety attacks, or I've had relatives who served in the military mm-hmm. and have had real PTSD and when they come back home. And so I'm very sympathetic to that. However, I think we don't have to look any further than to Jesus on the Sea of Galilee when that horrible storm came up, mm-hmm. and he called Peter, or he was walking across, Jesus was walking across Galilee, and he called Peter to come meet him out there on the water. And Peter did. And it worked great until, as long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, everything was good. He was mm-hmm. walking on the water like I walked on the sidewalk to come to your house. But the minute Peter started looking at the waves and around, then fear overtook him and he started to sink. I think, Radek, that is the exact explanation for why all of us, and I feel overwhelmed at times too, but we take our eyes off Jesus. Like you say, he knows the beginning from the end. He's got us in the palm of his hand, the Bible says.
Yes.
He will not let anything come into us that's not for our good or his glory. But Peter took his eyes off Jesus and he started to sink. He became gripped with fear. But by God's grace, of course, Jesus picked him up by his hand and saved him. But that, I think, is the simple answer to why mm-hmm. we struggle with anxiety. We take our eyes off Christ. We don't fill our minds with the Bible. We fill our minds with every other kind of junk out there,
yes.
but not the Bible. We keep our eyes on Jesus, we'll be just fine because he knows the end from the beginning. He knows the day you and I are going to die, or he's going to come back for the church in the rapture and take us home. We don't know, but he knows it all.
And even there is a story about Jesus in those very difficult moments in our lives. In those terrifying moments, there was, it's like a path on the sand, and you could see two footsteps, a pair of footsteps. And at one moment, you see only one pair of footsteps, and you ask yourself, Jesus, you have abandoned me. Mm-hmm. However, he says, no, I have not. It was me carrying you through those times. Yeah. So we need to remember that even through those deep valleys, we can still count on the God's help.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I find most fascinating about this book of Esther we're going through, because that's the one book of the Bible that God's name does not appear in. His name is not in there anywhere. And yet his handprints, his footprints are all throughout the whole story, how he saves the Jewish people using Mordecai and using Esther. But you see his hand throughout working through all these events. And you know they're not coincidental. And that's what we're finding so fascinating about Esther. Even though his name isn't there, God is there. He's working. And I would encourage your listeners, Radek, that in their lives, there are going to be times when we think God isn't there. But he's always working behind the scenes. I encourage you and I encourage your listeners to read through the book of Esther and see if they don't come to that same conclusion and see what happens to Haman, the horrible guy who came up with the plan to exterminate the Jews. It came right back on him. It's one of the best stories, narratives in the whole Bible.
So the question the viewer might ask right now, what should I do in those times when I feel stressed, I feel overwhelmed, I feel anxiety? What should I do? Just trust? What should I do?
I would follow Paul's example when he talked about there was given to me a thorn in the flesh to torment. We don't know what that thorn was, but probably some kind of physical problem. I think it was an eye problem going back to his day on the Damascus Road experience when he was blinded and he became blind for a period of time. I think he struggled with eye problems the rest of his life. Cataracts, maybe, I don't know. That's a guess. But he said he prayed 3 times to the Lord to take away this thorn in his flesh, heal him, because other people were healed through his ministry, and here he wasn't getting healed. And he asked God, why? And then God told him, he allowed Paul to struggle with this physical affliction so that Paul would learn to depend on God's power, not Paul's power. And I think Paul was a guy with a forceful personality, and people like that, they could easily start to think, okay, I can build this ministry, I can do this, because he's got such a forceful personality. I think God had to allow him to struggle with that, to realize, like all of us must, we can't do anything without God's help. And that's what Paul said. My grace is sufficient for you. Paul said that's what the Lord said to him. And he had to learn that the hard way. I think God allows all of us to go through experiences like that where we wonder, God, why are you allowing this? We need to come to the conclusion that God has allowed that for a reason. It's for our growth and his glory. Everything, I would say, Radek, everything is for that reason.
So we need to basically let the Holy Spirit work through us instead of grabbing those bulls by the horns and struggling, right?
We will get in trouble.
Yes.
And sometime if you want to hear the story, I know we have to go to break, but about how God works through physical problems, if you want me to tell the story of how God healed me from blood poisoning, where I had a line of sepsis infection from where the meat saw wound in my hand was all the way to my heart, and how God healed me overnight from that. Wow. I'll be happy to share that story if you want to hear it.
Sure, go ahead right now.
Right now, okay.
Yes,
so when I was in college, I worked as a meat cutter at a grocery store back in Thief River Falls, Minnesota. It's 17 miles from Viking, so it's the big town near us. And I was cleaning off the meat saw after cutting a pork loin, so it's a band saw. And the saw wasn't running. I had very good instruction from my boss. He was a great guy. And so the saw wasn't running, but you clean off the saw between different kinds of meat. You have to do that. But I wasn't as careful as I should have been because the saw wasn't running. The blade is just there. But as I wiped off the saw, I happened to just hit this part of my hand against the saw blade, and it's very sharp, and it made 2 little puncture wounds on my hand right here. So I went right over to the sink, washed it off, and put peroxide on it and milked it to get the blood out, and thought, well, I'll be okay. But then I thought, I probably should have a tetanus shot. So I went to the boss of the store, said, hey, can I go down to the hospital just a block away and get a tetanus shot? He said, sure. So that was Friday. Came back to work Saturday morning, and I noticed there was a little bit of redness here.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, that's not great. But I had the tetanus shot, and that Saturday night, I had a date lined up with a checkout girl, really cute girl. And I was starting to feel lousy, though, kind of achy. But we went out that night to a movie and came back home. And I was living at my parents' house at the time, going to the junior college up there. And as I took off my shirt, this red line, because I had a long sleeve shirt on like this, I didn't notice. I had a bright red line of blood poisoning all the way up my arm, and it terminated at my heart. Now, here's another thing in the sovereignty of God. One of my good friends in college, 2 weeks earlier, she was training to be a nurse, and she was just telling us about some of her medical training, and she said, if you ever cut yourself and you start to see a red line of infection moving toward your heart from the cut, go to the ER right away, because that means it's in your bloodstream. And if that line of infection ever gets all the way to your heart, you're pretty much a goner, you're dead. Because once it gets to your heart, then the heart pumps it throughout your body.
Yes.
And so I'm standing there, it's about midnight, in the bathroom of my parents' home. My parents are sleeping in the next room. And I'm looking at myself with this red line of infection all the way to my heart. And I'm remembering the words my friend Teresa, the nursing student, told me. So I looking in the mirror and I said, well, Lord, I prayed now, it looks like you're getting ready to take me home. Thinking about what she said, if the line of infection gets to your heart, you're dead. So I said, but if you want me to live and serve you, I know you can heal me. And but if this is the end, I can accept that because I've trusted in Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. When I die, I know I'm going to heaven, okay? And so I went to bed. I didn't tell my parents because up there in Minnesota, in the northwestern corner there, it would have been an hour's drive to the nearest good hospital that could maybe save my life if I'm in that bad a shape. So I said, I'm not going to wake my parents up and terrify them. I'm just going to go to bed. So I went to bed. I had this incredible sense of peace, Radek. And seriously, I slept better that night than I think I ever have in my life, trusting literally my life to God. When I woke up the next morning, Radek, my arm and even my hand looked exactly as it does today.
Wow.
There was no trace of the wound, no line of infection, and I felt perfectly great. I was miraculously healed overnight. There's no question in my mind about that. When I tell that to medical professionals, they're courteous like my doctors. I tell them that, they don't believe me. And I respect that because they've never heard of such a thing. If you were that far gone, and one time years later, my wife had been in one of these car accidents. We were at Lutheran General's emergency room. And now, you know me, I like to talk to people and meet new people. So we were in the ER, and at that time, they just had the flimsy curtain from one part of the ER to the next patient. There was a guy there, and I said, hey, how you doing? And he showed me. He had a little wound on his hand where a screwdriver had slipped. And he had that same kind of red mark, but it was only this far.
Okay.
They were admitting him to the hospital and throwing every drug they could at him because they saw the sepsis. So that confirmed to me, Radek, that if I had that line going,
serious.
I was going to die. But God intervened because he wanted me to serve him as a missionary, as a pastor, to be your friend. And to your listeners and viewers, this is not a divine accident that they are watching this video today. This is a divine appointment. That maybe there's someone out there that God wanted to hear this story about he miraculously healed me. And I can't guarantee he's like, if somebody else hurt their hand, if you hurt your hand, I would tell you to go to the ER, not to pray and distress God.
Yes,
He gives us common sense. But for where I was and where I lived at that time, I thought I was a goner. But people need to hear that God can heal you. He can work through anything. And if he doesn't, he still will take care of you. And if you've trusted in Jesus, when the worst happens, you die, you win because you go to heaven.
Before we hear the next story, let's hear from our sponsors, thanks to whom we have this show made possible. JOANNA from FAIRWAY Independent Mortgage Corporation is helping to finance real estate in Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Florida. She helped many people to get loans. It was over 1,000 clients already. There is no difficult or complicated situation for them. PRANICA and her entire team will do their best to create the most possible resolution. More information about real estate loans, etc., you can just call the number on your screen, 708-906-7177. Hunter's Restaurant is inviting each and every one of you from Thursday to Sunday for delicious Polish dinner. It's one unique restaurant in Chicago. From Thursday, jazz night, Friday, rock music, Saturday, dancing, and in Sunday we have a DJ on site, delicious food and great parties. 708-453-4430. If you would like to taste delicious, crispy, clean water in your home, PROECOLIFE is the way. Install today multi-level system PROECOLIFE filters in your home to get crystal clear water. There is a huge problem in Chicagoland area with lead and other contaminants that should not be in your water right now. Test your water and make sure you and your family drink clear and clean and healthy water, not only for drinking, but also for cooking and the water that you bath and shower in. Call right now for more information. PROECOLIFE 312-889-8888. If you don't want to worry about your taxes, call Kaczor&Associates in this tax season. Great prices and knowledge that exceeds regular CPA. Richard Kaczor also has a financial advisor license, so can help you with your retirement, IRS rollovers, etc. Call now and talk to Richard Kaczor personally. Exactly. Beautiful story. Any other stories I didn't know about?
Well, there was another time. We loved the outdoors. And so when we were going to seminary, my wife and I wanted to take a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters canoe area. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's 1.5 million unspoiled acres on the border between Minnesota and Canada. Boundary Waters canoe area. And there's an outfitter up there out of Grand Marais, Minnesota, a Christian outfit. And if you want to, you can hire one of their guides that will go with you. They'll supply the backpacks, the canoes, the food, and the guide, who turned out to be a phenomenal cook. He will go with you on the trip and take you to the best spots. And so we went on this canoe trip with him, this guide, and my best friend from Minneapolis. And we took this week-long trip canoeing, going from lake to lake in this place that's incredible, Radek. They don't allow any power boats there. So the only kind of powered boat they might allow is an electric trolling motor. Because so other than that, the only thing you hear are the loons and the wolves. And we were up there for a week. We only saw one other human being the entire week. It was heaven. And the fishing, the walleye, oh, that was great. But anyway, so we're come to the last day of the trip, and it's very windy, 40-mile-an-hour winds, plus the guide called them rip winds, and you could see gusts of wind coming over the water because it would whip up to whitecaps, 3 to 4 foot high waves. But we wanted to go home. We had been out there a week. We were kind of tired, and so we were heading out in the canoe. My wife is in the front, I'm in the back, and our guide and my best friend were in the other canoe, and the wind was coming up. And have you ever done canoeing? Kayaking, same thing. So, if the waves are coming like this, you want to make sure your boat is going perpendicular. If you ever get to the place where your boat is going the same direction as the waves, you're going to get wet, because that's what happened to us. And the wind was coming, and I was paddling as hard as I could on this side to keep the boat here, but we could see the wind pushing the canoe over, and eventually we came to be right on top of the waves. Boom, we were gone. And so I'm not a great swimmer, and I had leather hiking boots on at the time. My wife is an expert swimmer, but I am not at all. And I swim like a what do you call that? A bullhead catfish,
Okay.
right along the bottom. That's where I
Okay.
swim. So anyway, I remember going down in the water, Radek, in this turbulent lake up there in northern Minnesota. And I don't know, I was about 30, 40 feet below the surface. I went straight down because my boots filled with water. And at that time, just like the prayer I prayed when I had the blood poisoning, I said, well, Lord, it looks like this might be the end for me. But if you want me to live and serve you, just like the prayer I prayed when I did this, you can heal me. If you want me to live and serve you, I know you can save me
It
here.
happened in a split of a second.
In the split of a second. And I still remember looking up all this water, but there was a bright light. It might have been the sun. I don't remember how, but anyway, I did see a bright light. And instantly, Radek, I was up alongside the canoe, and when I popped up above the water, the canoe was like this far from my face. And because the canoes are built with a waterproof chamber on each end, so they'll float no matter what, I could grab onto the canoe, and eventually I climbed up on the canoe. It's upside down now, but I climbed up on top of the canoe and sat on it like a horse. And my wife was okay because she's a good swimmer. But so God saved my life again from drowning. Wow. He's bound and determined to have me be a pastor and to be your friend.
In these conditions, in these winds and all the weather, this canoe could have been anywhere.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And happened to be right by you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the canoe could have been 100 yards away by that point.
Been, yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
But God knew what I needed. And so then at that point, our guide in the other canoe, they were like 75 yards further from us. And somehow, I think God put it on the guide's mind, turn back and look and see where we were. And he later on, when he connected with us, he said, I saw you were riding pretty low in the water, and then I realized you were riding on the canoe upside down, so I knew you were in trouble. So They came back to us, helped us get the canoe back to shore, and get this, Radek, our JanSport backpacks that we'd purchased for the trip, they floated on the water. The backpacks that their company provided, they sunk to the bottom.
Wow.
But our nylon backpacks floated on the water. And they're not supposed to, but they did. Maybe another miracle of God.
Maybe.
But they got us on the shore, and we had to change our clothes. But because I guess the backpacks are like waterproof, our clothes inside were dry because the guide was very worried about hypothermia. Because this is now in September, and we were chattering. I know what hypothermia feels like growing up in northern Minnesota. We were on the verge of it. But we changed our clothes, and then we got back in our canoes, and we did make it home safely. But there again was another time when I should have died.
Absolutely incredible story. And this is exactly what this program is about. It's about incredible stories, because facts tell, but stories sell.
Absolutely.
If you didn't tell those stories, nobody would believe you exactly.
Absolutely.
You could be the high degree pastor or of the bishop of the Catholic Church, doesn't matter. Your story sells you, really, Steve. So this is amazing. One last thing I want to touch on. Every spring, I remember one particular spring, and you were walking by and you were taking pictures of the blossom. Of the sprouts and of the leaves, and you said something interesting. You need to take a picture of it because it passes so quickly.
Yes.
This period is very short, right?
Maybe a week.
And it's interesting because we need to take really snapshots of every moment in our lives.
Very good. Yeah.
Right? Because it passes so quickly.
It does. Yeah.
Right, and it reminded me of this, how beautiful you said is at that time. And also, one more thing I want to bring up, because we were talking about the Old Testament, New Testament. A couple months ago, maybe it was 6 months from now, there was a show on Netflix. They did all evangelicals. They did Matthew, they did John, and from all their perspectives, they've taken it down, of course. But I happened to watch the Matthew and how he inscripted the life of Jesus, and there was one particular scene, and I believe this is so beautiful because we're just past this horrible pandemic. And there was a story when, Jesus and his disciples, they sat by the river and they just decided to have some rest, and they started to eat. And then the Jews come, of course, and they say, Master, why your disciples don't wash their hands before they eat, as we do it? And he said something brilliant, Jesus always kills them in an instant. The Pharisees, right? That's how we call them? Pharisees, yeah, scribes. He said, it's not what comes into you that kills you, but what comes out of you that cause you trouble. And I believe, it applies to this situation. Okay, of course, we need to wash our hands. Of course, we need to take care of hygiene. We need to do whatever we can. But it doesn't really kill us, because there is a gazillion bacteria inside of our bodies.
And many of them are good.
And viruses too, because we deal with it on a regular basis. But it doesn't kill us. But what kills us is what comes out of your mouth, from your heart, your bad words, bad behavior. And this is really brilliant. I'd like you to elaborate on it a little bit.
Well, Jesus said, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so one, I think, important application of that is, if you want to know what's going on in your heart spiritually, try to listen to how you talk. That will tell you a lot about what's going on here, because anybody can put on a nice shirt, you've got a very nice coat and tie or shirt, and even the a pocket square looks very nice. Anybody can dress up and look good. But you have no idea what's going on in their heart. But when you hear them talk, after a while, you will find out what's going on in their heart. So if a person wants to examine themselves, ask their closest friends, relatives, spouse, if they have it, children, parents, to listen to how they talk. And then in a week's time, have them come back and say, well, based on what you've heard me say this past week, what do you think is going on in me spiritually? So for instance, if a person is always talking badly about other people, slandering, gossiping, running them down, that tells you there's a lot of darkness and unforgiveness going on in their heart. Or if the words that come out of their mouth generally, we all have weak moments, but generally, if they're encouraging, affirming, words of hope, words of healing, that will say, I see the presence of the Holy Spirit in your heart, because what comes out of your mouth is building others up. And that is such a huge thing. In marriage, you asked me a while back, what does it take to have a good marriage? And I said, yes, dear. And I was kind of kidding, but not really. But as we talk to one another, I do a fair amount of marriage counseling. And one thing, and other people have told me this, and I just pass it on, that in your relationships with people, the close relationships, you need to say 9 or 10 affirming things before you ever say one negative. And so for every one, let's say, complaint you might make, you've already given 9 or 10 positive words of encouragement, affirmation, love, whatever. And if that gets out of balance to, let's say, 50-50, half of the words you say are kind, the other half are demands or negative things, that relationship is going to be in serious trouble. And so I've shared that with many people over the years, and in my own life and marriage, I found it to be absolutely true. If you want to have a good relationship with people, it doesn't mean you ignore the hard things, the bad things, but you need to make sure the majority of your communication is to build up, to encourage. That will change people's lives.
Would you say, if you continue to affirm positive statements and encouraging statements, would you say you're doing the will of God?
Absolutely. Ephesians 4:32 is all about, don't let any trash talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful in building up. That is absolutely God's will. Yes, absolutely, Roddick.
So whatever is good for you actually is good for God.
Absolutely. Right? Yes. Amazingly. Like I said, the Bible is the owner's manual for life.
Because you said, okay, I want to serve you for the rest of my life, and that's how you became a pastor. But an individual might be reluctant to say, I don't want to serve God because I don't know if it serves me.
Yes.
But if you trust it and ultimately serve God, it will serve you 1,000 more than you would do on your own, right?
God has uniquely designed every one of us. Psalm 139 that I talked about, it's, He has made you different than me. You're unique. You have a unique way you can serve God, and you're doing it. And that's what's so exciting about being your friend and your neighbor. But for everybody, God has a unique plan because He's designed you from molecule by molecule for a unique way, a unique mission. When we find that mission and when we're trying to serve Him, it's the most fulfilling, exciting life there could ever be, because you're doing things the way God designed it. Like if you take a screwdriver and you use it to turn screws, it works good. But you try and use the screwdriver as a chisel, it doesn't work so well.
Yes.
Trying to use a screwdriver as a saw, doesn't work well. It's frustrating. That's how it is going through life, and you're not finding God's will, His purpose for you.
So you need to recognize what kind of tool you are and go this path.
Exactly.
Right? That's why we created this podcast. So I would encourage everyone, each and every one of you, to like and subscribe this content. Please take this link and place it in your social media so more people can watch it and benefit from it, because these are incredible stories. These are life-changing stories. And we want as many people as possible to benefit from them. And number two, we don't want to put any commercials in here. We just don't want to waste time for commercials. So we want to grow our list of subscribers so we don't have to actually place some commercials here. That's why we're here, and this program was created to show different people's path of life, to encourage you and find your own path. What is the definition of happiness?
What is the definition of happiness?
In your opinion?
Knowing what God has designed me to do and doing it. I don't think there's any other way to be happy than that. You can try to have material things or pleasures, whatever, and like people at church laugh at me because they call me gadget man, because I like little gadgets to fix things or whatever, and that's true. So I get a new gadget. Oh, that's great, that's cool. But after a week or two, sometimes it goes in the drawer. It's not so exciting.
Yeah.
Material things are like that. They only excite you for a brief period of time. But Radek, serving God, figuring out what He wants me to do, and doing that just like we're doing now, sharing the gospel, talking about Jesus, talking about faith, that gives me joy that never fades. That's the definition of happiness. Finding out what God wants you to do, using your unique gifts, talents, personalities that are very different than mine, but doing that is your path to happiness.
And how would you define the life's purpose?
Life's purpose is what Jesus called us to do, what we call the Great Commission, Matthew 28. Just before He ascended to heaven, He said, go into all the world and make disciples, teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. That's not just for pastors and missionaries. That's for every human being. That's where we find our greatest joy and fulfillment, is saying, Jesus, how do you want me to tell others about you? Using my way. Some people it'll be a carpenter, some people a bricklayer, some people a window washer, some people, all kinds of jobs. God uses all kinds of people. Thank goodness not everybody is a pastor. We'd be in trouble.
But we point to everybody else, how successful career they have, and maybe I'll jump to real estate and do the same and be successful. Doesn't work that way. You gotta find this passion, this life purpose.
Absolutely. And if a person, it's so good, Radek, what you just said. And if a person is truly seeking God's will, they will find it. Because God does not take any pleasure in thinking of us like blind mice that are trying to find our way out of it. No, He wants us to find His will. What I would advise people to do, try stuff. Just try different things. And when you get in that niche, you'll feel this is what I was made to do. And that's a great feeling. Like, who's the guy behind the movie Chariots of Fire? I forget his name right now, but he said when he runs, he feels God's pleasure because that's what God made him to do.
Great statement.
From Chariots of Fire. And that's what I encourage people to do.
But often we make even worse mistake. We get jealous or envy of other people because of they have success and I don't. And it really just shuts the door in front of us, because
Yes.
it doesn't give us any good.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any bad for them,
Yes.
but it comes back right to us.
And I think it's similar when we were talking about Peter walking on the water. When he kept his eyes on Jesus, everything was great. When he started looking at the circumstances around him, so what you just said, looking at the other people, you start to go down. We are not to compare ourselves to anyone, but to Jesus Christ. He's who we follow, as you have said earlier.
Pastor Steve, if this was right now one sentence, your last message that you would give to the church, to the people before you retire, what would it be?
Put your eyes on Jesus.
What we
That's
said
it.
a couple times.
That's
right?
simple. Put your eyes on Jesus. You can never fail.
And learn from him.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this show. It was a pleasure. I've learned a lot that I didn't know for the past 10 years. You know, we live next to each other, but we have never really chance to, well, we talk, but it's a small talk.
And you're asking good questions, so that gets us into some significant stuff. So it's my pleasure. And hopefully your audience knows this is entirely unscripted.
It is.
I didn't know what you were going to ask me.
Me either.
But you did great. So it's been very enjoyable for me too.
Thank you. And I hope you stay tuned for the all-new episode next week, Path of Life's Incredible Stories. This is your host, Radosław Karczmarczyk, and my friend and my guest tonight, Pastor Steve.